I should have known that Saturday morning would go wrong the second I left my garage door open. You don't think twice about little things like that, until the day they come back to bite you. The sun was barely warming the street, the air still cool and sharp, the kind that carries every sound farther than you expect. A distant lawnmower hummed somewhere down the block, and a mockingbird kept repeating the same 3 notes from the power line. I was wiping down the seat of my ATV, the one I'd spent half a year restoring in stolen hours after work. Every bolt, every smear of grease, every replacement part had been a small act of patience. To me, it wasn't just a machine. It was 6 months of grit and stubbornness made into something that roared when the engine caught. I should have been proud, content, maybe even relieved to see it finally gleaming in the daylight. Instead, I felt the weight of eyes on me. I looked up and there she was, Madison Duke, 16 years old, daughter of our Homeowners Association president, Karen Duke. The kid who'd grown up learning that rules were for other people, never for her. She leaned against her mother's HOA golf cart at the edge of my driveway, her phone tilted just high enough that I knew it was recording. That smirk on her face, it wasn't playful. It was possession, like she already owned whatever she laid her eyes on. "That's a nice toy, Cole," she said, her voice stretched thin with boredom, like speaking to me was the hardest chore of her day. I didn't rise to it. My wife Pam always jokes my resting heart rate must be in the negatives. I kept polishing the seat, rag moving in circles. "It's not a toy, Madison," I said flatly, "and you're standing on my property." She tilted her head, that grin spreading wider. "Technically," she drawled, "the driveway counts as common area. Bylaw 7, Section C, Mom says so." It wasn't the first time she'd used her mom's authority as a weapon, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. She was testing me, armed with just enough fake legal language to sound official to make a neighbor hesitate. That was the Duke family specialty, intimidation disguised as order. I dropped the rag and looked her straight in the eye. "The concrete I poured and paid for is mine. Take another step and it's trespassing." She laughed, a short, ugly bark that echoed off the quiet street. Then her gaze shifted past me into the garage, roaming over my tools, the shelves, the mower. And then I saw it, the flicker in her eyes when she noticed the small, black magnetic box on the side shelf, the one that held my spare key. My stomach sank. That was my second mistake, convenience over caution. And she knew it. Her grin sharpened like a cat spotting a bird too slow to fly. "Mom says your ATV's a violation anyway," she said loudly. Loud, ugly, not in keeping with the community's aesthetic. "It's parked in my garage," I replied, trying to end it. "It's not making a sound. Go bother someone else." I turned away, coiling an extension cord, hoping she'd get bored and leave. The quiet stretched too long, too perfect. And then my phone buzzed on the seat. A motion alert from the garage camera. I swiped it open and froze. There she was on the feed, Madison slipping into my garage like a thief who'd done it before. Quick, confident. She grabbed the magnetic box, popped it open, snatched the key, and pocketed it. She even looked at the camera for a split second, smiling like she wanted the record of her crime. Untouchable, that was the word hanging around her like perfume. She thought she couldn't be touched. I walked to the edge of the driveway, and by the time I got there, she was already swinging her leg over the ATV. She jammed the key in, turned it, and the engine thundered to life, shaking the air. The quiet morning shattered. No helmet, phone in one hand, that triumphant sneer on her face. She glanced back at me, winked for the camera, and gunned it. Tires screeched, the ATV fishtailed, and then she was gone, racing down the street, live streaming her theft for the world to see. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped it clean. 6 months of work, my pride and joy, had just been ripped away in broad daylight by a teenager with too much arrogance and too little fear. Pam came out onto the porch with her coffee. She'd heard the engine. Was that our ATV?" she asked, confused. I held up my phone, the video still paused on Madison's smug face as she pocketed the key. "She just stole it," I said, my voice calm but cold. "And I've got every second of it on tape." Pam's eyes widened. "Are you calling the police?" I nodded slowly, watching the street where the sound of the engine was fading into nothing. "Yeah," I said, "this time the Dukes don't get away with it." The dispatcher's voice came through the speaker like a lifeline. Calm, professional, practiced. Mr. Mercer, can you confirm you are following a stolen all-terrain vehicle? That's correct, I said, my hands steady on the steering wheel, even though my chest was tight. Green Can-Am Outlander 2022 model, stolen from my property minutes ago. Driver is a juvenile, female, 16. Name is Madison Duke. As I spoke, I could see her up ahead, a tiny green speck weaving side to side like the road belonged to her. She wasn't just joyriding, she was performing. One hand on the throttle, the other still holding her phone up high. A live stream of arrogance. The dispatcher's voice never wavered. Sir, please do not pursue. Maintain safe distance only. I'm not pursuing, I said firmly. Just observing. I'm a witness. I glanced at my dash cam, its little red light blinking. Everything was recording, auto-uploading the second I hit my home Wi-Fi. A second set of eyes, proof no one could erase. Pam's voice came in like a steadying hand, patched through on the line. Cole, I've got the garage footage. It's crystal clear. Madison taking the key, the whole thing. I'm sending it to 911 right now. That's the thing about Pam. Where I stay calm, she stays sharp. Always one step ahead. She was already pulling up GPS data, checking the AirTag I'd hidden in the ATV's rear storage. Within seconds, she had Madison's route pinned down to the exact intersection. I tightened my grip on the wheel as Madison hit a roundabout too fast. The ATV wobbled on two wheels, nearly flipping into the flower bed. A car horn blared nearby, someone slamming their brakes as she cut them off. And still, she laughed. I could hear it faintly when I rolled my window down, that high-pitched cackle of a kid who thought nothing bad could touch her. Behind me, flashing lights bloomed in the mirror. A cruiser roared past, siren splitting the calm Saturday air. Another blocked the road ahead. For a second, relief surged in my chest, boxed in. Over. But then Madison did what spoiled kids do best. She panicked. Yanked the handlebars hard, swerved onto Willow Creek Lane, a narrow residential street where toddlers learned to ride tricycles and old men walked their dogs. My heart dropped. She's evading, I said into the line, voice tight now. She just turned onto Willow Creek. That's a residential zone. The dispatcher's tone sharpened. Units in pursuit. Mr. Mercer, pull over immediately. I eased my truck to the curb, jaw clenched as two cruisers screamed past. I should have felt relief. Instead, a knot twisted in my gut. I knew this was no longer about my stolen ATV. It was about who Madison might hit before the cops caught her. And then the white SUV came barreling toward me, tires shrieking as it skidded to a stop at my bumper. The driver's door flew open. Out stormed Karen Duke herself, in a pastel pink tracksuit that looked more suited for brunch than a crisis. Her oversized sunglasses hid her eyes, but not the fury on her face. She slammed the door and marched toward me like she owned the road. Cole Mercer, she screeched, her voice slicing the air. What do you think you're doing? You're harassing my daughter. I'll have you arrested. I rolled my window down just far enough, kept my expression blank. Your daughter, I said evenly, stole my ATV out of my garage, and she's currently evading police. No harassment required. Her face twisted. It was like watching gears grind in a machine that had never been oiled. She was trying to spin reality fast enough to make it my fault. That was Karen's gift. In her world, the Dukes never did wrong. It was always someone else who failed to bend. She did no such thing, Karen spat. Madison is a good girl. I held up my phone, thumb tapping the paused video. Madison caught red-handed on my own security cam, grinning as she pocketed the key. I turned the screen toward her. It's all on video, Karen. For the first time, she flinched. Barely a twitch, but I saw it. She knew. And that tiny crack in her mask was more satisfying than any words I could have said. But Karen wasn't done. She dug frantically in her oversized purse, pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper, and thrust it at the officer who had just arrived on scene. You can't charge her. She has a condition. The officer took the paper, his face unreadable. I leaned to get a better look. Bold font across the top, medical exemption notice. Underneath, a mess of fake legal jargon, and at the bottom, not a doctor's signature, Karen's. The officer folded it neatly and handed it back. Ma'am, he said with the kind of patience you only hear in people who have seen too much of this nonsense. This isn't a legal document. This is a piece of paper you signed yourself. It doesn't exempt your daughter from vehicle theft. Karen sputtered, "Do you know who I am? I'll have your badge." But before she could spew more, the world shifted. A scream, tires, a sickening crunch. It came from Willow Creek. The officer's radio crackled to life, but he was already sprinting back to his cruiser. "Stay here," he barked. Sirens wailed as he sped off, leaving Karen pale on the curb, her condition note fluttering uselessly in her hand. I pulled my truck slowly forward, dread pooling in my chest. By the time I turned onto Willow Creek, the scene was chaos. My ATV lay sideways in the street, one wheel bent in on itself. Madison was tangled in a rose bush, wailing dramatically, but no one was looking at her. All eyes were on the stroller lying tipped on its side, wheels still spinning. The young mom, Sarah, was on her knees in the grass, clutching her baby to her chest, rocking back and forth, sobbing with relief. The baby's thin wail cut through everything else. He was alive by inches. Neighbors poured out of houses. I saw shock harden into anger on their faces. For the first time, Karen's power didn't shield her. Madison wasn't untouchable anymore. She was just a reckless kid who'd nearly killed a baby in her arrogance. And everyone had seen it. The street had gone silent in that way it only does after something terrible almost happens. No birdsong, no lawnmower hum, not even the buzz of insects. Just the sound of Sarah's sobs and her baby's thin, frightened cry. I stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the stroller's wheels spin down into stillness. Every neighbor who had ever rolled their eyes at the Duke family was here now, faces stiff with shock, jaws tight with something more dangerous than fear: anger. Karen arrived seconds later, pushing through the cluster of people, her pastel tracksuit practically glowing against the somber scene. She didn't look at the overturned stroller, didn't look at Sarah's pale face or the baby she clutched to her chest. Her eyes went straight to Madison, crying in the rose bushes, thorns clinging to her skin. "My baby," Karen shrieked, rushing to her side. "What did they do to you?" For a moment I thought the neighborhood might collectively explode. Tom, Sarah's husband, came running from their house, skidding to his knees beside his wife. He wrapped his arms around them both, relief and fury mixing across his face. Then he stood, his voice ringing out clear and sharp. "What did they do to her?" He pointed at Karen, his hand trembling with rage. "Your daughter almost killed my son, and you're asking what we did to her." The words hung heavy in the air. You could feel the shift, the way the neighbor's silence turned into judgment. Even Mrs. Gable, who usually avoided confrontation like a cat dodges puddles, folded her arms and glared at Karen with thin-lipped contempt. Karen faltered just for a second, but then snapped back into her old routine. "It was an accident," she stammered, holding up the crumpled medical note like a shield. "She has a condition. She gets confused. She didn't know what she was doing." No one bought it. Not with the smell of burned rubber still sharp in the air. Not with Sarah's stroller lying there, the plastic frame cracked from the impact. The officer who had rushed back from the crash site approached Karen, his face grim. "Ma'am," he said, his tone clipped, "your daughter is being placed under arrest. Vehicle theft, felony fleeing, reckless endangerment. Step aside and let the paramedics check her." Madison wailed louder as two officers helped her up, her scratches no more than rose-thorn scrapes. But the show had lost its audience. For the first time, the arrogance was gone from her eyes. She looked small, scared, a child who thought she was untouchable until the cuffs clicked. The crowd was silent as she was led to the patrol car. Silent, but their faces spoke volumes. They weren't watching a girl anymore, they were watching the Duke's power collapse in real time. I caught Pam's eye across the street. She had come down from our porch, phone still in her hand, her jaw tight. She didn't have to say a word. I could read her expression like a book. This wasn't just about the stolen ATV anymore. It was about accountability. By the time the cruisers pulled away with Madison in the back seat, neighbors were already clustering in small knots, whispering in sharp, angry tones. Words like dangerous, reckless, lawsuit. The same people who once nodded politely to Karen at HOA meetings were now glaring at her openly. She tried to gather herself, straightening her shoulders, but it was useless. The fake authority, the empty threats, it all crumbled under the weight of a community that had just seen too much. Pam slipped to my side as I gave my statement to an officer. She leaned in, her voice low. "You realize this wasn't random, right?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" She had that excuse ready, the fake medical note, like she was expecting Madison to get caught doing something. Pam's eyes narrowed. That wasn't panic, that was preparation. I thought about it. The way Madison had gone straight for the spare key box, the practiced motion, the smirk as if she wasn't just stealing but performing, and Karen's immediate arrival on the scene, papers in hand. It was too smooth for coincidence. "She's arrogant," I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck. She thought she could bluff her way out of anything, print a form off the internet, call it legal, bully people into silence. "Maybe," Pam said, "but I don't think we should underestimate her. They've run this neighborhood for 5 years, bullying, bluffing, intimidating. Maybe this time it backfired. But you and I both know people like the Dukes don't stop unless someone makes them." Her words stuck with me as the crowd slowly dispersed. Sarah and Tom went inside, their baby still fussing softly. Neighbors lingered, trading stories of fines, threats, letters. You could feel something shift under the surface, a crack in the dam. For years, everyone had grumbled in private. But now they had seen too much to stay silent. That night, Pam and I sat at the kitchen table, laptops open, coffee mugs between us even though neither of us was touching them. My ATV had been hauled off to the impound lot as evidence. Madison was spending her first night in juvenile detention. And Karen? She was probably packing her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, spinning webs of excuses no one wanted to hear anymore. Pam's fingers flew across the keyboard. "We need to gather everything, every video, every clip, build a timeline." I raised an eyebrow. "You're building a case." "Damn right I am," she said. "This isn't just about our ATV. This is about a family that thinks they're above every rule but their own. Let's see what happens when we use their own playbook against them, except we'll use facts instead of threats." Within minutes, she'd fired off a message to the small group chat she'd set up months ago. Neighbors tired of the HOA's nonsense, but too afraid to speak up alone. "Hi everyone. If you have doorbell or security footage of the ATV between 10 and 10:30 this morning, please send it. We're creating a timeline for the police." The response was immediate. Videos poured in like water rushing through a crack in the wall. Madison blowing through a stop sign, her voice shouting, "Can't catch me," on another. Neighbors who had never spoken up before were suddenly eager to contribute. It wasn't just evidence, it was solidarity. We stayed up half the night stitching clips together. Pam mapped the GPS trail from the AirTag hidden in the ATV. A perfect red line across our neighborhood, every reckless turn documented. And then something caught her eye. "Cole," she said slowly, pointing to the screen. "Look here," she stopped. I leaned closer. On the map, the red line paused for nearly 90 seconds in a cul-de-sac near the HOA's maintenance shed. "She wasn't just riding around," Pam whispered. "She was meeting someone." The pieces clicked in my mind like tumblers in a lock. The stolen key, the practiced theft, Karen's pre-written excuse. Madison wasn't just joyriding, this was a plan. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't her plan at all. The glow of Pam's laptop was the only light in the kitchen, the clock on the wall ticking past midnight. We should have been in bed, exhausted from the chaos of the day, but neither of us could let it go. Madison stealing the ATV was outrageous enough. But the stop, the strange, deliberate pause near the HOA maintenance shed, nagged at us like a splinter. Pam zoomed in on the GPS trail again. 90 seconds, she said, tapping the map. Long enough to load something onto a trailer, long enough to hand something off. Her words hung heavy. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. So she wasn't just joyriding, she was delivering it. "Delivering it where?" Pam murmured. Her fingers danced across the keys. She opened a browser, pulled up an online marketplace site, and typed in a few choice keywords: compliance pickup, HOA, vehicle removal. A list of ads popped up. At first glance, they looked harmless, offers for junk hauling, debris removal, landscaping cleanup, but the language was off. Too specific. too bureaucratic. One caught my eye immediately: recreational vehicle compliance seizure. Pam clicked it open and we both leaned in. The description was chillingly blunt: removal of non-compliant recreational vehicles. ATVs, dirt bikes, RVs parked in violation of HOA standards. Recovery fee $500. The photo was nothing but a flatbed trailer. The seller's name, community first, contact email, a disposable address. Bylaw 11F, Pam read aloud, her voice low and sharp. That's what they cited. I shook my head. Bylaw 11F doesn't exist. I've read the book cover to cover. Pam's expression hardened. Then Karen made it up. They're running a racket, Cole. Madison steals the vehicle, they stash it at the shed, then list it online under some fake compliance service. Neighbors think it's official, pay $500, and the Dukes pocket the cash. I felt a cold fury rising in me. It all fit. The smug smirk on Madison's face, Karen showing up armed with her bogus note, the practiced intimidation. This wasn't just arrogance. It was organized theft dressed up as HOA enforcement. Pam's phone buzzed with another video from a neighbor, this one showing Madison laughing as she sped past, shouting, "Compliance check!" like it was a game. Except now we knew it wasn't a game, it was a script. She was the repo agent, I muttered, and Karen was her shield. Pam's eyes gleamed with determination. Then we have to show the whole neighborhood what they're doing, and we can't just accuse them, we need proof, irrefutable proof. That was the difference between anger and justice. Anger just wanted to scream. Justice wanted receipts. The next morning, after only a few hours of restless sleep, I called Officer Miller, the cop who had taken my statement. My voice was calm, steady, but underneath I was seething. "Officer, this wasn't just a one-off theft," I said. "It's part of something bigger. They've been running a scheme using fake bylaws and online ads to steal vehicles. We have screenshots, GPS logs, and neighbors with footage." He listened quietly, typing as I laid it all out. When I finished, there was a pause on the line. Then he said, "Mr. Mercer, are you telling me the HOA president is running an extortion racket with her daughter as the thief?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," I replied, "and we think we can catch them in the act." The plan was simple, almost elegant. My buddy Chase had an old beat-up ATV sitting in his garage, loud, ugly, and the perfect bait. We'd park it at the end of my driveway, half covered by a tarp, looking like a violation. Then Pam, posing as an anonymous neighbor, would contact the ad. "We want you there," I told Officer Miller. "We want you to see it firsthand. No one can spin their way out of that." He hesitated. "This is irregular," he admitted. "So is an HOA president running a theft ring," I countered. "Look, you've got video of Madison's theft, a near miss with a baby stroller, half the neighborhood as witnesses, and these shady ads. You know this isn't a hunch. This is a pattern. Help us stop it before someone else gets hurt." Another long pause, then his voice came back, firmer this time. "All right, I'll take it to my sergeant. If we do this, you follow our instructions to the letter. No heroics, you're a witness, nothing more." "Understood," I said. The waiting was the hardest part. 24 hours of tension, of watching Karen drive past our house in her white SUV, sunglasses hiding whatever schemes her mind was spinning. 24 hours of wondering if they'd smell the trap. Pam set up 3 cameras, the doorbell, a hidden one in the bushes, and a dash cam in my truck parked across the street. She mirrored the feeds straight to the detectives. It felt like preparing for a military operation, except our battlefield was a quiet suburban street with sprinklers hissing on manicured lawns. At 7:55 p.m. the next evening, the trap sprang. A rusty flatbed Ford rumbled down our street, headlights off until the last second. It wasn't a professional tow truck. It was something cobbled together, like the kind you'd see hauling scrap metal. 2 men climbed out. I recognized them instantly. Gary Peterson, HOA board member and Karen's right-hand man, and Gage, the so-called head of HOA security, more infamous for barking at kids riding bikes than for actually protecting anyone. Only tonight, Gage wasn't wearing his little security polo. He was in a black hoodie, jeans, and work boots. Less community protector, more common thug. They walked straight to the bait ATV without knocking, without posting a notice. Gage gave it a kick. "Yep, this is it," he muttered. I stepped out onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, my heart thudding. My voice was calm, even casual. "Evening, gentlemen, can I help you?" Gage turned, and that smile spread across his face, the kind bullies wear when they think they've already won. "Evening, Mercer. Just performing a compliance pickup. This vehicle's in violation of Bylaw 11F. I tilted my head, keeping my expression blank. "Funny. Never heard of Bylaw 11F, and you're on my property, so I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Gary shifted uncomfortably, but Gage stepped closer, puffing himself up. "We're not leaving. We're taking the vehicle. You'll get it back when you pay the $500 fine." The words dripped with smug authority. He thought he had me cornered. But he didn't know the cameras were rolling. He didn't know the cops were watching in real time. He didn't know the net was already tightening around him. And I didn't have to say a thing. All I had to do was stand there, coffee mug in hand, while the Duke's carefully spun web started to unravel, thread by thread. The air felt heavier than it should have, like even the streetlights were holding their breath. I stood on my porch, mug in hand, watching Gage swagger closer. He thought he was in control, that his scowl and squared shoulders were enough to scare me back into the house. "Mercer," he growled, "we're the authority here. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He planted himself at the bottom of my steps, looking up like a wolf ready to lunge. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just sipped my coffee and set the mug down on the railing. "This isn't about authority," I said quietly. "This is about theft, and you're caught in the middle of it." Gary Peterson shifted uneasily by the truck, his hands fumbling with the winch cable. He didn't look like a man enforcing a bylaw. He looked like a man waiting for a disaster he couldn't stop. But Gage leaned closer, his face inches from mine. His breath smelled of stale coffee and arrogance. "You think you're clever, Mercer, asking questions at meetings, recording every little thing. You should have kept your mouth shut." And then he did it. He shoved me. It wasn't a hard shove, just enough to make me stumble back a step, enough to mark the line between intimidation and assault, enough to hang him with his own rope. Every instinct screamed at me to shove him back, to meet aggression with aggression. But I didn't. I raised my hands, palms open, a universal signal of de-escalation. My voice stayed calm, steady, but with an edge sharp enough to cut through his performance. "Gage, you just assaulted me in front of a witness." I nodded toward Gary, "and on camera." His eyes flickered. Just for a moment his tough guy mask cracked. He looked around, searching for a camera he couldn't see. The seed of doubt was planted. "What camera?" he barked, but the conviction was gone from his voice. "The one streaming live to the police department," I said. It was a bluff, but Pam turned it into truth in that exact moment, pushing the live feed to the detective's line. The timing was perfect. Because before Gage could even sneer another word, the night exploded. Headlights flared, sirens shrieked, and two unmarked sedans peeled around the corner, boxing in the flatbed truck. Doors flew open. 4 plainclothes detectives poured out, badges flashing, guns holstered but ready. Their faces were hard, businesslike. "Police," one barked. "Hands where we can see them." Gary dropped the winch cable like it had burned him, throwing his hands skyward so fast his shoulder cracked audibly. Gage froze, eyes wide, every ounce of bluster draining from him as the reality sank in. Officer Miller was the first to reach us. He ignored me completely, stepping straight into Gage's space. His voice was low, controlled, with a contempt you could feel in your bones. "HOA security, huh?" he said. "You have the right to remain silent." Gage stammered, the words tripping over themselves. "W8, this is a misunderstanding. We were enforcing the bylaws." Miller's tone cut him down flat. "You assaulted this man and attempted to steal his property. We have it all on video. We heard every word live." Gage's mouth opened, closed, opened again. But it was too late. Another detective grabbed his arm, spun him around, and pressed him against the side of the flatbed. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the quiet street. I can't lie, that sound was one of the most satisfying I've ever heard. Gary was babbling already, trying to save his own skin. I was just following orders. Karen set this up. I didn't want to. His words cut off as another detective cuffed him and led him toward a waiting car. He was practically tripping over himself to confess, desperate to throw Karen under the bus before his own wheels locked up. I stood silently on my porch watching it all unfold. I hadn't lifted a hand. I hadn't raised my voice. And still, justice came crashing down right in front of my house. Pam stepped outside, slipping her arm around my waist. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. We both just stood there, side by side, as the Duke's enforcers were hauled away like common thieves. The detectives photographed the bait ATV, the flatbed, even the spot where Gage had shoved me. One of them nodded toward us. "You two did half our job for us," he said dryly. But I couldn't shake one thought. Gage and Gary were pawns. The head of the snake was still out there. Karen Duke hadn't shown up tonight. She was smart enough to stay away, to let her men get their hands dirty. And that meant this battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. By the time the street quieted again, it was well past midnight. The flatbed was towed away as evidence. Gage and Gary were carted off in separate cruisers. The detectives collected our thumb drive, loaded with video evidence, GPS data, and screenshots of the fake ads. Everything seemed airtight. But deep down, I knew Karen wouldn't give up without a fight. People like her never did. Sure enough, the next morning, the phone rang. Officer Miller's voice was tight, clipped, carrying a frustration he couldn't hide. "Mr. Mercer, Pam, we have a problem. The dashcam SD card from your truck logged into evidence last night. This morning, it's gone." I froze. "Gone? What do you mean gone? Your forensics team pulled it out themselves." "I know," he said, "but the bag seal was broken, the card's missing. We're tearing the station apart, but it's vanished." I felt a surge of hot anger. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Pam whispered what we were both thinking. Karen. She must have had a lawyer pull strings. Someone inside the system willing to bend, to make inconvenient evidence disappear. But Karen hadn't counted on one thing. Pam tapped the server humming in the corner of our office. "They don't know we have backups. Full resolution copy auto-uploaded to our cloud the second you parked." I relayed it to Miller. He was quiet for a beat, then let out a low chuckle. "You two are something else. Send me the file immediately. And know this, tampering with evidence isn't just dirty, it's a felony. If that card turns up in the wrong hands, her whole house of cards collapses." As I hit send on the email, I realized something. Karen had overplayed her hand. She wasn't just untouchable anymore, she was desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. When people lose control, you can see it in their eyes. Some shrink, some break, and some, like Karen Duke, double down. She didn't just dig in her heels, she went for the jugular. The morning after the sting, our neighborhood group chat was on fire. Screenshots, videos, eyewitness accounts, everyone was sharing their piece of the story. It was like watching years of pent-up frustration spill into the open. People who had once been too scared to speak up were now fearless. Pam read message after message aloud. Karen fined us for having a garden gnome, said it was a safety hazard. She towed my son's car without warning, claimed it was inoperable. It was. She threatened to put a lien on our house if we didn't replace the mailbox post. The post was fine. It was endless, and for the first time, Karen wasn't the one controlling the narrative. But she wasn't going down quietly. At exactly 3:17 that afternoon, Pam's phone pinged with an email from the HOA board. Subject line, notice of emergency hearing. The message was short, clipped, written with the arrogance of someone who thought she was still pulling the strings. Homeowner Cole Mercer is hereby required to attend an emergency disciplinary hearing tonight at 6:00 p.m. Failure to appear will result in fines, penalties, and possible lien action against your property. Pam's lip curled. She's panicking. This isn't a hearing, it's retaliation. I nodded. And a trap. She's going to try to flip the story, paint me as the aggressor, probably spin Gage's shove into self-defense. But what Karen didn't know was that Pam and I were already 2 steps ahead. The cloud backup had finished syncing. Every video, every angle, every timestamp, triple redundant and shared with the detective's office. Even if Karen had friends inside the system, even if she'd pulled the SD card, the truth was beyond her reach now. We still went to the meeting, not because we had to, but because I wanted her to see that the fear she used to control people was gone. The HOA clubhouse sat at the end of Willow Creek Drive, a squat beige building with peeling paint. It looked less like a community hub and more like a relic from the 70s. Inside, the air smelled of old carpet and burnt coffee. Karen was already there, perched at the head of the folding table like a queen holding court. Her pastel suit was freshly pressed, her pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She didn't look rattled. She looked rehearsed. To her left sat Gary's empty chair. To her right, a new face, a lawyer, sharp suit, sharper jawline. He leaned close, whispering in her ear, sliding papers across the table. When I entered, the room fell into an uneasy hush. Neighbors lined the back wall, whispering, phones in hand, recording discreetly. They weren't here for a hearing. They were here for a reckoning. Karen's smile was thin and brittle. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice dripping false civility. "You stand accused of harassing HOA officials, obstructing community compliance operations, and," she paused dramatically, inciting hostility against this board. The lawyer slid a paper across the table toward me. "My client is prepared to file for a civil injunction if this behavior continues." I didn't touch the paper. I didn't even look at it. I just leaned forward, rested my elbows on the table, and spoke softly. "Karen, the police have a copy of every video. The shove, the theft, the extortion attempt, the ad you ran under a fake company name, and the missing dashcam card, they know about that too." Her smile faltered for half a breath before she snapped it back into place. "Conspiracy theories," she scoffed. "Fabrications, you doctored those videos." I raised my phone, tapped the screen, and the footage played on the TV behind me, clear, sharp, undeniable. Madison stealing the key. Madison firing up the ATV. Gage shoving me. Gary demanding $500. The neighbors gasped. The lawyer's face hardened, his jaw tightening as he realized he'd been brought into a sinking ship. Karen tried to recover, slamming her palm against the table. "This is slander. These people," she gestured toward the crowd, "they're sheep. They'll believe anything." But the room didn't buy it anymore. The same neighbors who once cowered under her fines and threats were now filming her meltdown. Every word, every gesture, every desperate denial was being captured. And then the door swung open. Officer Miller walked in, followed by 2 uniformed officers. The room froze. He didn't look at Karen. He didn't look at me. He simply walked to the front, unfolded a paper, and read aloud. "Karen Duke, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit theft, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice." The sound that left Karen's throat wasn't a scream. It was worse, a strangled gasp, half fury, half disbelief. She lurched to her feet, knocking her chair back. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. This is my community." Miller's voice was flat, unyielding. "Not anymore." As the cuffs clicked shut around her wrists, the room erupted. Not in chaos, but in applause. Neighbors clapped, some cheered, others just let out long, relieved breaths. It wasn't joy. It was release. Years of intimidation dissolving in a single moment. Karen's lawyer stood frozen, his briefcase hanging loosely in his hand. For all his polished confidence, he didn't move to help her. He just turned, muttering under his breath, and walked out the door without a backward glance. They led her past me, her eyes blazing. She tried to twist her mouth into one last sneer, but it wavered, collapsing into something hollow. For the first time since I'd known her, Karen Duke looked small. Pam squeezed my hand, her eyes shining. "It's over," she whispered. I wanted to believe her, but deep down I knew this wasn't the end. Karen would fight through lawyers, through loopholes, through every scrap of power she could still cling to. But that night, as the clubhouse emptied and neighbors hugged each other in the parking lot, I let myself feel something I hadn't in months. Hope, because for the first time, the Dukes weren't untouchable. They were accountable, and the whole neighborhood had seen it with their own eyes. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and floor polish, that peculiar mix of age and authority. The kind of place where whispers bounce off marble walls and footsteps echo like gongs. I'd never been inside for anything more serious than jury duty. But this time I wasn't an observer. I was at the center of it. Pam squeezed my hand as we walked down the long corridor. "Just breathe," she whispered. Her voice was steady, but I could feel her pulse racing as much as mine. Karen Duke's trial had become a spectacle. Local news vans lined the street outside. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact in the grocery store now crowded the benches, eager to see the woman who ruled over them finally face a judge instead of a homeowner's rule book. When Karen entered, she was dressed in a sharp navy suit instead of pastels, her hair pinned back, makeup precise. She wanted to project power control, but her wrists twitched, her eyes darted too often. She looked like someone clinging to a mask that no longer fit. And then there was Madison. She sat 2 rows back, flanked by a juvenile officer, her phone confiscated, her smirk gone. 16 years old, suddenly forced to realize that arrogance had consequences. She wouldn't meet her mother's eyes, not once. The prosecution's case was built methodically. Officer Miller laid out the sting, the flatbed truck, the demand for $500, the shove caught on camera. A digital forensics expert confirmed the cloud backups. Neighbors testified, one after another, about years of fines, intimidation, and threats. Each voice chipped away at the illusion Karen had built. But the most devastating blow came when the prosecutor called Madison to the stand. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the teenager walked nervously to the witness chair. Karen's head snapped up, eyes wide, lips forming a silent no. Madison's voice trembled at first, barely above a whisper. "Mom told me to take the ATV. She said it was the only way to teach Mr. Mercer a lesson. She said nobody could touch us." The room went dead quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. Madison swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her. She made me memorize what to say if I got caught, that I had a medical condition, that it was just confusion. She even printed the note herself. Karen shot up from her chair, face red, voice breaking. "That's a lie. She's my daughter. She's being manipulated." The judge banged the gavel, voice stern. "Mrs. Duke, sit down. One more outburst and you'll be removed." But the damage was done. Madison's words lingered in the air, heavier than anything else said that day. Pam leaned over, her voice low. "That girl just saved herself and buried her mother." The defense tried to spin it all, claimed Karen was just enforcing community rules, that Madison was a rebellious teen exaggerating, that neighbors had grudges. But against the mountain of evidence, video, audio, testimony, it was like trying to patch a sinking ship with tape. The climax came when the prosecutor revealed the missing dashcam card. They played footage from a security camera in the evidence room. Grainy, black and white, but clear enough to show a woman in oversized sunglasses slipping in after hours, rifling through bags. She removed something small, palmed it, and walked out. The video paused. The prosecutor turned to the jury. "That's the defendant. That's Karen Duke tampering with police evidence, the very evidence she now claims doesn't exist." Karen's lawyer dropped his pen, the weight of futility heavy on his shoulders. Even he couldn't spin this one. When the jury returned, their verdict was swift. Guilty on conspiracy, on theft, on tampering, on obstruction. The gavel struck. Karen Duke is hereby remanded into custody pending sentencing. As the bailiff stepped forward, Karen tried one last time to claw back control. She turned toward the gallery, toward the neighbors who had once feared her, and shouted, "You'll regret this. Every one of you, you needed me to keep this place in order." But her voice cracked halfway through and the words landed flat. The neighbors didn't shrink back. They didn't flinch. They sat straighter, shoulders squared, united by something stronger than fear, freedom. Pam and I walked out into the sunlight together. The crowd followed, buzzing with energy, relief, even laughter. It felt surreal. The HOA president who once ruled by intimidation was now just another inmate in County Orange. But as we reached the steps, I spotted Madison sitting alone on the edge of the fountain. Her knees were pulled up to her chest, her phone gone, her bravado stripped away. For a moment, I just watched her. She looked younger than 16, just a scared kid who had been taught all the wrong lessons. I sat down a few feet away. She glanced at me wary. "I didn't want to do it," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "But Mom, she always said if I didn't help I wasn't family, that I was weak." I nodded slowly. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is saying no to the people closest to us. She looked at me sharply, searching my face for judgment. I didn't give her any, just quiet honesty. "Madison," I said gently, "this doesn't have to define you. You made mistakes. You admitted them. That takes more strength than your mother ever showed." Her eyes welled up, and for a second I thought she might break down right there. But she wiped at her face, stood quickly, and walked away before the vulnerability could linger. Pam slipped her arm through mine. "You think she'll be okay?" I exhaled, watching Madison's figure disappear into the crowd. "I don't know, but at least she has a chance now." For the first time, the Dukes weren't the shadow hanging over us. They were just a family broken by their own lies. And we were free. The courthouse steps emptied slowly that afternoon, neighbors lingering in little groups like survivors after a storm. For years we had walked on eggshells, checking our lawns twice a week, measuring our fence posts down to the inch, terrified of another letter in the mailbox. But now there was a lightness in the air. People smiled when they caught each other's eyes. Some even laughed, awkward at first, then freer. Pam squeezed my hand. "It feels different, doesn't it?" I nodded, like we finally got our neighborhood back. Karen was remanded to county jail, awaiting sentencing. The trial had torn away her armor, but the final blow came 6 weeks later. The courtroom was packed again. Reporters, neighbors, even the mayor had slipped into the back row. Everyone wanted to see what justice would look like for a woman who had built an empire out of intimidation. When the judge read the sentence, 5 years in state prison, fines exceeding $200,000, restitution to every family she had extorted, you could almost feel the air rush out of the room in relief. Karen collapsed into her chair, the pearls at her neck catching the light like broken promises. She muttered something under her breath, but it was lost under the clatter of people exhaling, murmuring, nodding. Madison wasn't in the courtroom that day. She had been given probation, community service, and counseling. The court had decided she was more pawn than mastermind. For once, accountability had spared her life rather than destroyed it. After the sentencing, the neighborhood gathered in the park, our first meeting without Karen's shadow looming over us. It wasn't an official HOA meeting. It was just people, finally free to speak their minds. Tom stood and raised his voice. "No more fake fines, no more threats. If we're going to have a board, it's going to serve the people, not rule them." Applause rippled across the crowd. It wasn't polished or formal, but it was real. For the first time, neighbors who barely spoke were shaking hands, trading phone numbers, even making plans for block parties. Pam leaned close to me. "This feels like a community again." I smiled, maybe for the first time. In the weeks that followed, change swept through like fresh paint on old wood. The HOA bylaws were reviewed, line by line. The fake ones Karen had invented were struck down. Neighbors volunteered for the new board, ordinary people with ordinary jobs, not power-hungry bullies looking for leverage. One Saturday morning, I stood in my garage, wiping down the ATV that had finally been returned from impound. The scratches were still there, scars from Madison's reckless ride, but I left them. They were part of the story now, reminders of what we'd endured and what we'd overcome. The garage door creaked open, and I spotted Sarah pushing her stroller past, waving with a smile that no longer trembled. Her baby gurgled, reaching out with chubby hands. For the first time, I waved back without that knot of tension in my chest. But poetic justice has a way of writing its own endings. 3 months after Karen's sentencing, I was sipping coffee on the porch when Pam came out, phone in hand, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You're not going to believe this," she said. She turned the screen toward me. It was a news article, headline bold: Former HOA president sued by state for fraudulent vehicle scheme. The article laid it all out. Beyond our neighborhood, Karen and her cronies had been running the same racket in 3 other communities. Fake compliance ads, unauthorized tows, extortion disguised as fines. And now the state attorney general was piling on charges. Karen wouldn't just serve time. She'd leave prison bankrupt, stripped of every last dime she'd squeezed from good people. I leaned back in my chair, letting the news settle over me like the final chord of a long song. "Karma," I murmured. Pam smiled, with interest. That night, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and kids played freely in the cul-de-sacs again, I thought about everything we'd been through. The stolen ATV, the near tragedy with Sarah's baby, the sting, the trial. And I realized something. Sometimes justice doesn't come fast. Sometimes it crawls, slow and painful, through years of silence and fear. But when it finally arrives, when the truth finally cracks open the lies, it doesn't just punish, it frees. I looked around at our neighborhood, no longer a prison of rules, but a place where people were starting to live again. And I thought of Karen, sitting in a cell, her empire crumbled, her name now a warning instead of a weapon. Pam slipped her hand into mine. "Think we'll ever forget all this?" she asked softly. I shook my head. No, but maybe that's a good thing, a reminder that power built on fear always collapses in the end. The crickets started their nightly chorus. A dog barked 2 streets over, and the faint smell of someone grilling drifted on the air. For the first time in years, the simple sounds of our neighborhood felt like home. And I knew we were finally free. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.